This broadcast is appropriate for all ages right here on #WeAreMovieClub. It's time for Scary Movie Squad. I am Cameron. Salutations. I am Cameron and I am conversation ready. I'm trying at least. We all have our bad days. Oh, yep, forgot I wanted to do that. I want to let the title show. I want to show the title triangle with the little triangle, and Melissa George, who really doesn't have any triangles on her. I just want to see what it looked like for me to reach back and touch the green screen poster. And that just looks like I'm stroking her leg, and that's really not what I'm about there. But Melissa George does carry this movie rather well. Pretty much everyone else in the movie is a no-name actor, or they're a stunt double for her. Let's be honest. Even the kid was a little shoddy, but he was trying to play an autistic kid, which is a very difficult thing to do. So it's you need him for about 60 seconds of the movie, if we're being honest. He's got to do like 3 things correctly, and one of those is take a slap and run away. And the other one is sit. Okay, so maybe like 4 or 5 things, but less than half a dozen things that he has to do correctly for any amount of time. And Melissa George really has to carry it all. She has to go from being like super bitch to caring mom to super sad hot girl to, oh, I'm running, oh, I'm chasing, oh, I'm crazy, oh, I'm not. And this movie is a little all over the place, but it's all wonderful. It is a time travel movie, technically. Like, I'm not spoiling anything yet. Like, I'm really not. The whole premise of the movie is that she goes on a boat trip. The boat has an accident, and her and her friends get on this big ship in which weird things are happening. Ooh. And she's stuck in a loop, trying to get off the ship. So that's kind of like into spoiler territory now. The way the movie goes is that her and her friends are on there, and then somebody else is on the boat. They see somebody, or the ship, because it is a ship. Like, they were on a little tiny boat, not a yacht. I don't care what they say in the movie. They were on like a little schooner, a sailboat. Dumb bastard. It's a sailboat, not a schooner. Mall rats. Always good stuff. So, what is happening there is that they find the ship that floats by or drives by, whatever you want to call it, and they board it. Seems a very bad design that you can do that from a capsized sailboat, but they manage to get on the ship. They know that at least one other person's on board, but they are constantly creeped out by the lack of crew. If you're familiar with ships at all, they take quite a bit of crew to keep them going. Now, she goes down to engineering at one point, and you can see that everything's just going. So we could call it magically powered, paranormally powered, however you want to call it. But the point is that there is no one else on the ship but them. And as the movie goes on, they start kind of getting chased down and distracted and picked off, and it becomes like a survival horror movie, like very early on, once they're on the ship at least. But as things continue, Melissa George is kind of the only one to survive, and then she actually fights off the pursuer and knocks her over the edge. But the shooter, who is the character I've called her, ends up telling her that she has to kill them all. It's the only way off the boat, or to reset the loop, or whatever she says. I actually think I wrote it down. If I'm being honest, or I typed it out. And part of the premise, too, is that she's got an autistic kid at home, and, like, she's having problems with it, obviously. So that's what the beginning of the movie shows us. And then she gets on this boat trip. She's all traumatized or whatever from her life. and there's gaps missing at the beginning, like, so it is very oddly structured. But once she finds her friends, gets on the boat, gets to the ship, like, that's where the real movie picks up. I'd be happy starting there, and having all the boat stuff be at the end. But they do developmental establishing stuff. Bleh. So where was it? You have to kill him. It's the only way home. It's something like that. And so to me, that's kind of where, like, the reset, that is where the reset happens. So that's kind of the second chapter of the movie for me, because the first chapter is essentially her on the boat, or on the ship, because everything up to that's just development for that. So she hears some music in a cabin. Who knows why it starts? She goes, stops it. She, like, dropped her axe. She's looking at herself in the mirror, and she hears a noise. And she goes out to the deck. She looks over the rail, and she sees herself and her friends on the boat coming towards the ship, or the ship's coming towards them, however you want to perceive that. So, yay. So now we can just kind of see the first chapter of the movie again from second MG's, or Melissa. Jessie, I think, is her name in the movie. I can't remember. I was just, Melissa George, what you doing? I don't know. I felt like I kind of got to know how she acts through Silent Hill, but I'm sure she's better range than that. Oh god, itchies. So she is watching the same movie that we watched, essentially, from a fly on the wall position, because she's kind of stalking her friends, trying to figure out what's going on, because obviously that hurt isn't her. And there's all these kinds of things that you could suppose from this point. So we are back in time, even though we've moved forward linearly. There's not like a reset like there is in, like, Happy Death Day or Groundhog's Day. There's no split on the timeline. It's one timeline. And real quick, I guess this is good enough time to go to this. Let's go to the little whiteboard here. And I like to demonstrate something real fast. I won't spend too much time on this, but if you look at a normal timeline, you have a line, right? This is what happened before. But if you go back, that's a really thick line. Let's change that. Alright, so if you have a normal timeline, but there's a point in which you go back, and you're starting from here again, typically that creates a new timeline, because the events that happened aren't the same. Now, it depends on how you look at everyone's perception too, because especially if, like, at some point during this event you go back to the same point in time that you left, let's say, so these line up, kind of. Then from here, there's a bunch of time that you missed. So you're living the same life up to this point, actually. Yeah. Sorry, you're actually missing this time. Oh god, how do you say this? So you end up with a fractured timeline, and even if you manage to return to the correct timeline, which you can't, because you can never get back here because you've altered what happens in the objective universe. But you've still experienced the same amount of time, so you have a linear path that you follow, and this does a very similar thing. So when we're looking at Triangle, this is kind of how I see it. It's like you've got your normal timeline, and then the ship takes her back to the beginning to when they first got on the boat, right? But it doesn't really create this alternate timeline for her. The same events are still occurring based on that first run. So she's kind of living a parallel line to that, and then resetting in this loop each time. So it varies, like the actual events from this point on only vary as much as she affects it. And then each affected by each loop, because she's back in the same place. So, oh god, this is kind of creating a parallel oh, this may be just a different version of the same thing, because I've argued against the multiple timeline thing forever, because they always resolve in paradoxes where someone like is disappearing or whatnot. But regardless, she keeps riding the same loop, whether or not anything happens to a previous version of herself as well. So the things that happen to her past selves don't matter to this timeline. Like, it just keeps going. So, oh god, this is actually almost worse now that I'm putting it on paper. So she keeps looping on the ship, and then she manages to finally become the shooter, who I mentioned already goes overboard. So as she's stalking her friends, she essentially like has like 3 runs that matter. She does it over and over again, and you can tell that because of the number of lockets that she finds in the grate. I think she throws it down each time to try to help keep track of how many times she's done it, so she knows kind of what run she's on. But even the second run has a bunch there already. So this is complicated. I probably should write this out, probably, because I'm probably going to fuck this up. But and my argument, like, throughout a lot of the movie was that she can't do anything to her past self, because if she does, then that eliminates her own timeline. But eventually we do see that that is the case. Like, there's several points where she can't shoot herself, but eventually, as the cycle happens, she does get off that boat. And she, oh my god, she gets back to her home, and she sees herself being a bitch, and she kills herself. And then she has the body in the trunk, and she tries to drive away, and like the whole thing with the yelling at her kid again, and she ends up killing her kid. You would think she would be able to stop that from happening. You'd be able to ignore him long enough just to get to the harbor. Because it's not like he's going to jump out of the car. Just make sure you don't hit the wheeler. But at the very least, she goes and she hits the bird each time, and so blood gets on the windshield, and he freaks out. We know that much is guaranteed. But we don't know if that she hits the truck over and over again. Because I don't know. Like, the rules don't seem very consistent now that I'm looking at it, because the bird should be there every time, unless it's her that did it. Maybe that's the case. Well, then why aren't there bodies every time? So if she goes back and kills herself multiple times, because there were multiple Sallys, I think it has to do with the persistence of the loop. The idea that everything that has happened to her remains objectively real, if you will. Oh god, man, I'm not my full self today. I can't do this. Time travel is the worst. We're gonna say that outright. Time travel is the worst. It's why I like fatalistic time travel. It makes a lot more sense. I'm gonna go to the whiteboard for one last example. This makes sense. I've been saying this for years. Whiteboard. There we go. Oh, that's... Why is that black now? What the fuck happened? Why go to chat? No one told you to go to chat. Mean little whiteboard. Okay, so we're just coming down here. So fatalistic time travel goes something like this. We've got the one timeline. There's none of this branching shit. Even loops are more simple here. If you will refer to Harry Potter when Hermione used the time turner. So at any point that they were to go back in time to make more time to study or whatever, the events that happen here exist every time in every run. So even the first time somebody interferes, they move on. Someone interferes, they move on. Someone interferes, they move on. Someone interferes, they move on. So on the second loop, they go back and they find out that it's them interfering in each of these instances. So if we want to... Nope, that's wrong. Because you run through this, interference, loop. And then if we go with the loop, we interfere in these spots. And it's that thing that Harry says. I'm gonna get off this. It's the thing that Harry says. It's like, I knew I could do it because I had already done it. And that's how fatalistic time travel works. Everything that happens, or that will happen, has already happened. Because it's a consistent, singular thing. You don't have to resolve paradoxes. There's that illusion of free will that is fate. Yes, you have the free will to do whatever you want, per se, but you're already fated to choose those things. So from the beginning of time, based on the cascade of events, you have already predetermined to choose whatever you want, and those factors are known. It's all math. It's math too complicated for me to do, but I understand the basic principles enough to know to have faith that it's true. So if you want me to act religious about this, I will. Whatever, hit me up, Camera25 on the Twitters. But that's kind of my feelings on it. And that's what I want from a time travel movie. I just never get it. I always get these things. Triangle, I think, is pretty close because it's fatalistic to a point, but it does allow her to change small aspects. However, they always come back on the boat. Well, she never stops them, so let's call it that, because we realize the loop is bigger than just the boat. When everyone else but her is dead, the boat will reset it, but you can get off the boat and get back to shore, and that's still part of the loop. But you can choose not to go to the boat. So, now whether or not she kills herself, she can get out of the loop at any time by just continuing to live her life and not get on the boat. Now, that means that she's not saving the other people, but yeah. So I don't know. That's the fun part of this movie, is like there's this big puzzle of like, how do you fix this situation? Like, what's the tactical response that you need? And that's what I like about horror movies. Like, horror movies are fueled by stupidity. So, of course, she'll never make the right choice in the movie, in theory. Otherwise, it becomes kind of an action flick. The fact that it's a horror film means that she has to make... somebody has to make the wrong choices. They have to be put in a bad situation. And that all has to fuel the situation to the point where it's not going to happen. And this movie does that really well. It does the time travel really well. It does the shooting multiple scenes from multiple angles all really well. It does the doubles of her fighting with herself really well. Having a hood on helps with that. It adds little details that mystify and confuse you. This is, I don't know, I really recommend this movie. The music and the coloration's good. It's bleak when it needs to be bleak. Having the hallways all look very similar kind of gives a certain gravitas to the boat, if you will. I'm going to remove that window capture from OBS. Melissa George is awesome again. She kind of carries the movie. It's the rest of them are pretty much no-name actors that you can tell are red shirts from the beginning. It's like, oh, you're all going to die. That's great. And that's another reason I like this movie, because to me it's really refreshing when you hit movies like that will kill off a lot of the cast. You don't see that a whole lot. Like, I used to lot Event Horizon for a long time because it was like the only movie I knew that where like everyone dies at the end. Spoilers if you want, but this is another movie where it comes pretty damn close. How do I say it? You just don't see it a lot. And I want more of it. I want my fatalistic time travel movie, and this gets me really, really close. It's objectively linear, at least, where she can do whatever she needs to do to move forward. I would argue that to a point, Back to the Future is also objectively linear, but they have a paradox resolution there with Marty vanishing. Like at the dance, his hand starts to fade away, and then it comes back, and it should be one or the other, because the future knows... Yeah, you know what? I really disagree with that now that I think about it. The future knows whether or not you already did something, where like he just started fading for dramatic effect for the audience. Yeah, So that's a lot of how I feel about Triangle. And I realized I only talked about the movie for about half of the time that I've talked. Let me go through my show notes real quick, see anything. Again, it was the same movie like 3 times, so you could probably watch it in a third of the amount of time and get everything from it, like if you did a cut of it and watch it in one go. But you wouldn't get the full effect of the movie, and I really think it does that really well. And it's not like it's really a slasher flick from the beginning to end, but she kind of progresses that way. She's honestly slowly losing her mind, trying to figure out how to save her kid, how to save everyone. And if you watch it from the beginning of the movie, you'll notice that the wardrobe changes at the beginning of the movie are consistent with the events later in the movie. So it really kind of jumps in. It leans, and this is what leans it more towards fatalistic, except for the point. No, maybe I made my argument after all, because she always comes back and kills herself, so she dies there. Okay, so there's the paradox. The paradox is, how does she get to the point where she goes back in time to kill herself? Because there has to be that one timeline run before she doesn't do that in order for her to get there. So there's your paradox. That's just not resolved, which is fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. You don't have to resolve every paradox in some grand motion of exploding the universe. Alright. I've got to go do some things. One way or another. Or I can just go back to sleep. Fuck it. It's just one of those days, you know. Until you see me next time, I am Camera, and this has been a little bit of Triangle here on Scary Movie Squad. Here on #WeAreMovieClub. If you see anything else we're up to, go ahead and click the annotations, and they'll take you to our other channels. Thanks for watching.